In 2016, an obscure tech company in China quietly released a mobile app. It had no celebrities, no billion-dollar marketing campaign, no global fanfare. Its name, Douyin. But within a year, it had a Western twin, TikTok. Fast forward just a few years, and TikTok wasn't just an app anymore. It was a global obsession. It became the default platform for the youth, a cultural engine for memes, music, fashion, activism, even politics. TikTok didn't just go viral, it redefined virality. It changed the rules of the internet, rewired attention spans, disrupted industries, and conquered countries, all in under 5 years. But what if the story behind TikTok's rise is not as innocent as it appears? What if this wasn't just a case of good tech meeting global demand? What if this was a calculated, state-influenced conquest of the global digital mind? TikTok's story on the surface is that of a meteoric startup success. But peel back the layers, and a darker truth begins to emerge, one involving covert data collection, algorithmic manipulation, geopolitical tensions, and psychological engineering on a scale the world has never seen. Let's start with its creator, ByteDance. Founded in 2012 by Zhang Yiming, ByteDance's original ambition was simply build a better algorithm for delivering content. Their first breakout product wasn't even TikTok, it was a Chinese news aggregator called Toutiao, which used machine learning to predict what users wanted to read next. But ByteDance's real genius lay not in journalism, but in attention engineering. They understood something no other tech giant had fully mastered: people don't want content. They want dopamine. And ByteDance could deliver it on demand with surgical precision. By the time they launched Douyin in China, ByteDance had already mastered the infinite scroll, the feedback loop, the push notification that lands just when you're about to put your phone down. But in 2017, the company made a bold move. It would take this addictive formula to the rest of the world. Rather than export Douyin directly, they created TikTok, a separate app with servers supposedly isolated from China. This was no accident. They knew the Western world had grown wary of Chinese tech. Huawei was already being investigated. ZTE had been sanctioned. ByteDance wanted to avoid that fate. To break into the US market quickly, they acquired Musical.ly, a cringy but popular lip-syncing app used by American teens. Overnight, TikTok inherited tens of millions of Western users and integrated them into its own addictive engine. That's when things exploded. Unlike YouTube, where creators built followings over time, TikTok could make anyone famous in a day. Its For You page was pure algorithmic magic, personalized, engaging, relentless. No two users ever saw the same feed, and that was the point. It didn't matter if you had followers or not. What mattered was engagement. Attention was democratized, commodified, and weaponized. Young users flocked to it. Legacy media couldn't keep up. Instagram scrambled to clone it with Reels. YouTube launched Shorts. Facebook looked lost. Even Google was threatened as TikTok became a search engine for Gen Z. But underneath TikTok's fun dances and cat videos, something much more serious was unfolding. TikTok, unlike any other platform before, it could read you. Not just what you clicked or liked, but how long you paused, where your eyes lingered, how your face reacted. It wasn't just collecting data. It was building psychological profiles, real-time dossiers on what each user feels. And then came the question that would haunt policymakers around the world. Where is all this data going? ByteDance claimed TikTok operated independently of the Chinese government. They insisted user data was stored on servers outside China. They promised that no data was ever sent to Beijing. But leaked documents, whistleblower testimonies, and internal memos told a different story. Engineers in China had access to US user data. Decision-making was still centralized in Beijing. Moderation guidelines mirrored those of Chinese state censorship, including the suppression of content about Tiananmen Square, Tibet, and Hong Kong protests. The Project Texas initiative, a billion-dollar push to move all US data to Oracle-controlled servers, was launched only after regulators began sniffing too close. And by then it was too late. TikTok already had the attention of over 1 billion monthly active users. It wasn't just a platform, it was a geopolitical force. It could shift culture overnight. It could make a product sell out globally in hours. It could amplify voices or silence them with a tweak to the algorithm. Politicians began to worry. Intelligence agencies issued warnings. Congressional hearings were convened. And for the first time, a social media app was being called a potential national security threat. But still the app grew, because addiction doesn't care about ethics. And TikTok had built the most potent attention weapon the world had ever seen. In the coming sections, we'll explore just how deep this influence runs. How TikTok has manipulated social movements, shaped political discourse, and even undermined democracy, all while building one of the most powerful surveillance machines ever deployed under the guise of entertainment. This isn't just about dancing teens or influencers. This is about control. And the fight for the future of your attention has only just begun. The power of TikTok doesn't lie in what users post. It lies in what the algorithm chooses to show. Unlike Facebook or Twitter, where content distribution is largely dependent on social connections or follow account, TikTok's feed operates like a black box. The For You page is governed by signals few outsiders truly understand. Engagement metrics, dwell time, facial expressions, click-through rates, all of it feeds a machine designed not just to entertain, but to optimize emotional response. But what happens when such a powerful system starts deciding not just what you enjoy, but what you believe? That question turned from theoretical to urgent when researchers began noticing strange patterns. Political videos from conservative creators mysteriously vanished. Pro-union content seemed to flatline in reach. Meanwhile, influencers promoting apolitical content, dancing pranks, makeup tutorials continued to flourish. Some called it coincidence, others called it curation, but mounting evidence pointed to something more sinister: silent censorship. TikTok's moderation policies were exposed in 2020, when leaked documents revealed content guidelines instructing moderators to suppress videos with ugly facial features, abnormal body shape, and most chilling of all, mentions of politically sensitive content. That included criticisms of the Chinese government, references to Hong Kong's protests, and anything related to the Uyghur genocide in Xinjiang. Internally, ByteDance tried to spin it as content suitability for a global audience, but in practice, it was state-aligned censorship embedded in a global entertainment product. Take the case of Feroza Aziz, an American teen who in 2019 posted a viral makeup tutorial. Halfway through the video, she pivoted to speak about China's concentration camps. The video was promptly taken down. TikTok claimed it was an error, but the pattern kept repeating. Creators who touched certain topics faced sudden suspensions, shadow bans, or algorithmic invisibility. Meanwhile, content aligned with nationalist or state-friendly narratives in China was quietly elevated. This wasn't just about hiding inconvenient truths. It was about shaping perception through absence. Censorship without visibility. If you never see dissent, you never think to question. But it wasn't just Chinese politics being manipulated. During the 2020 US elections, intelligence officials warned that foreign actors were using TikTok to spread disinformation and deepen political divides. Viral videos about voter fraud, conspiracies, and extremist ideologies reached millions, many without fact-checking or moderation. Unlike Facebook, which at least made a public show of policing political ads, TikTok claimed it banned them altogether. Yet subtle influencer campaigns and algorithmic promotions continued unchecked. Behind closed doors, engineers in Beijing could tweak the algorithm to shape sentiment, promote nationalist hashtags, bury dissent, prioritize content that destabilize certain narratives while boosting others. TikTok, with its infinite feed, didn't just reflect culture, it could manufacture it. And because of its short-form nature, messages spread fast without context, without scrutiny, without room for nuance. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from whistleblowers inside ByteDance. In 2022, a former TikTok executive testified that Chinese engineers had master access to all US user data, and more than that, they had the power to influence the feed itself. With a few commands, content could be suppressed or promoted. Trends could be orchestrated. Political temperatures could be manipulated, and all of it could be done invisibly. This wasn't just dangerous, it was unprecedented. Never before had a foreign-owned app with this level of algorithmic control embedded itself so deeply into the culture of a geopolitical rival. The US government knew it. So did the EU. And yet legislation moved slowly while TikTok continued to grow. Activists began calling it what it was: a psychological weapon. Because when you control what people see, you influence what they believe. TikTok had become a silent arbiter of global consciousness. It could trigger panic, spark outrage, or lull entire generations into apathy. The same tool that spread viral dances could spread propaganda and do it so smoothly you'd never know it happened. And then came the astroturfing. In early 2023, reports emerged that TikTok was artificially boosting content aligned with state interests, especially around issues like US-China tensions, Taiwan, and trade policy. Pro-China influencers saw their videos skyrocket in views. Meanwhile, those critical of Beijing reported sudden drops in reach or permanent account bans. TikTok denied all allegations as always, but the pattern persisted. The company still owned by ByteDance continued to operate with opaque data policies, hidden moderation protocols, and ties to a government infamous for its information control. And yet, its footprint only grew, especially among young users, who increasingly turned to the app not just for entertainment but for news. This is where the danger crystallizes. Because TikTok isn't just a social network, it's a lens. A curated, addictive, politically sensitive lens that determines what hundreds of millions of people think is real. And in that lies its darkest potential, not in the data it takes, but in the reality it shapes. Every second, TikTok processes hundreds of thousands of videos. Every scroll triggers a series of calculations: what to show next, what to suppress, what to push viral. But behind that seamless stream of content lies something far less elegant: an invisible workforce toiling in silence to make the app feel effortless. For years, ByteDance maintained the illusion that TikTok's experience was fully automated, that its AI was simply better, smarter, more advanced, more intuitive. But the truth, as uncovered by former employees, leaked training documents, and investigative reports, tells a different story. TikTok doesn't just rely on artificial intelligence. It relies on armies of human moderators, many working in appalling conditions, often in developing countries and almost always behind layers of third-party outsourcing firms designed to conceal the chain of accountability. These content moderators sift through the worst of the internet violence: suicide, pornography, racism, hate speech, thousands of videos per day for pennies per hour. In the Philippines, India, Eastern Europe, even parts of the US, workers describe environments reminiscent of psychological torture. Chambers, windowless rooms, grueling shifts, minimal mental health support. Some are required to review as many as 1,000 videos a day, and they are punished if they miss even a single violation. For many, the trauma is not theoretical. Former TikTok moderators have spoken out about experiencing PTSD-like symptoms after prolonged exposure to graphic content. And when they asked for psychological help, they were told to toughen up. They weren't engineers. They weren't public-facing employees. They were disposable cogs in a global moderation factory. And yet they were the final filter before content hit your feed. But the labor exploitation doesn't stop there. TikTok's rise depended not only on moderation, but also on content generation. Early in the company's global expansion, ByteDance deployed a secret army of internal creators, hired specifically to make viral videos and plant them within the platform. These weren't influencers. They were paid employees working from anonymous studios in China, Singapore, Los Angeles, and London, producing endless streams of dance videos, comedy skits, and faux user-generated content. Their job wasn't to express themselves, it was to simulate virality. This factory model of content creation allowed TikTok to kickstart trends, artificially manipulate cultural tastes, and fabricate grassroots popularity. And it worked. Because once a few videos go viral, real users begin to imitate. The illusion becomes reality. The machine becomes self-sustaining. But as TikTok scaled, so did the exploitation. Influencers from Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America reported being approached by TikTok representatives to promote the platform in exchange for micropayments, often less than $5 per post, with no contract, no ownership rights, and no legal protections. These creators, often desperate for exposure, were used as tools to push the app in new markets. Once traction was achieved, TikTok would prioritize Western creators and marginalize the very influencers who helped them grow. It's a pattern that repeated over and over. Exploit to enter, abandon to expand. And then there's the question of the products TikTok pushes. From viral TikTok, made me buy it, trends to in-app shopping, the platform has quietly built an empire of consumer manipulation, and much of it leads to products made in Chinese factories with questionable labor standards. Take Shein, for example, a brand that owes much of its global success to TikTok trends. Investigations into Shein's supply chain have revealed violations ranging from forced overtime to unsafe working conditions, and in some cases, ties to Xinjiang-linked suppliers. TikTok has never once flagged or moderated Shein content for ethical concerns. Why would it? Both benefit from the same system. Cheap labor, fast trends, endless consumption. It's not just about what the algorithm promotes. It's about what it allows to flourish unchecked, unchallenged, and often at the cost of human dignity. But perhaps the darkest revelation is this. TikTok's entire infrastructure is optimized not just for engagement, but for extraction. It extracts data from users. It extracts labor from moderators. It extracts creativity from marginalized creators. It extracts revenue from youth attention spans, all while presenting itself as a harmless app for dances and jokes. And if a moderator breaks down, replaceable. If a creator demands credit, silenced. If a supplier raises ethical concerns, ignored. It's not just a content machine. It's a people machine, built to harvest, discard, and replace on a global scale. In this system, virality is no longer an accident. It's engineered, and behind every viral video is a cascade of hidden labor, hidden suffering, hidden intent. So the next time you swipe up and smile at a silly video, ask yourself, who paid the real price for that moment of joy? In 2023, a room full of US lawmakers grilled TikTok CEO Shou Chu for over 5 hours. It was one of the most watched congressional hearings in years, and for good reason. On the surface, the questions were about data privacy, child safety, and algorithmic transparency. But the subtext was far more explosive. Is TikTok a Trojan horse for the Chinese Communist Party? The CEO deflected. He insisted TikTok was headquartered in Singapore, that American user data was now stored in the US via Oracle. He repeated that no Chinese officials had access to the algorithm, but few were convinced. Behind the smiles and rehearsed answers lay a geopolitical fault line that no PR team could bridge. Because the world had finally started to understand. TikTok wasn't just another tech company, it was a battleground. Governments across the globe began taking action. India had already banned TikTok back in 2020, citing national security threats. Australia, the UK, and Canada followed with partial restrictions, especially on government devices. The European Union launched multiple investigations into how the app handled children's data and dark pattern design. The US floated an outright ban, drawing outrage from free speech advocates and civil libertarians. But for many, the debate wasn't just legal, it was existential. How do you regulate an algorithm? How do you enforce borders in a digital empire? How do you protect a generation that lives inside the machine? Because TikTok had become more than a platform, it had become a digital culture, an identity, a currency of social belonging. Banning it would be like banning high school, or music, or oxygen. And yet the dangers kept escalating. Doctors reported spikes in adolescent anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, many linked to obsessive content loops on TikTok. Researchers found the app's algorithm often pushed users, especially young girls, into rabbit holes of body dysmorphia, extreme dieting, and mental illness. Unlike other platforms, TikTok didn't just wait for you to search for darkness. It offered it algorithmically and without warning. The system rewarded extremes and punished nuance. A teen who engaged with a few self-help videos could soon find herself flooded with clips romanticizing trauma, depression, or suicide. The app didn't care. It was just doing what it was designed to do, maximize engagement. Meanwhile, TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, was quietly expanding its influence into adjacent spaces: education, e-commerce, AI development. It wasn't just a social media company anymore. It was becoming a global infrastructure layer. And the West was unprepared. Even Silicon Valley giants Meta, Google, Snap had failed to compete. Their TikTok clones lacked the cultural momentum, the raw addictiveness. TikTok had eaten their lunch and then fed them the bill. In response, governments attempted the impossible: legislate an algorithm. Bills were drafted to demand transparency. Committees were formed to audit source code. Lobbyists on both sides spent millions pushing narratives of protection versus censorship. But regulation moves slowly. Technology does not. And so the algorithm kept learning. It learned how to avoid detection. It learned what regulators wanted to hear. It learned how to become indispensable, especially in times of crisis. During protests, elections, pandemics, TikTok's role was undeniable. It could amplify truth or drown it in noise. It could uplift marginalized voices or bury them beneath sponsored trends. It could promote health campaigns or conspiracy theories. The algorithm didn't discriminate. It optimized. And perhaps that's the greatest threat. Not that TikTok is evil, but that it is indifferent. Indifferent to the consequences of its virality. Indifferent to the mental health of its users. Indifferent to the geopolitical fire it fans. It is a machine, and we gave it the keys to the kingdom. So where does that leave us? Some believe the solution is nationalization, turning TikTok over to local ownership under strict transparency rules. Others argue for algorithmic audits, digital literacy campaigns, and mandatory age restrictions. A few go further, calling for a new digital constitution, a set of enforceable rights and limitations for all platforms, no matter where they originate. But while experts argue and regulators stall, the real war continues on your phone every time you open the app. TikTok doesn't need to hack your device. It already has your mind. And that's the final, most terrifying truth. This isn't about China versus America. This is about power, how it's hidden, how it flows, and how it rewires entire civilizations while we're busy scrolling. So the next time you open TikTok, ask yourself, who's really in control? You or the algorithm? Because in the end, the darkest secret of TikTok isn't what it does to you. It's what it makes you do to yourself.